Good afternoon, Patriots, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you all have had a fantastic week, and today we're going to dive into a topic that I am very passionate about. I'm super excited to get into with y'all today. I'm in a new environment, as y'all can tell. This is my living room behind me. My internship is done, and so I'm going to try to do my videos during the day instead of at night. My wife works from home. She's on the other side of the apartment. So hopefully this works out for the better. So as always, if you can, please make sure to like, share, subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And don't forget to support our fellow Patriots down below. So without any further ado, sit back, relax, get your drink, and let's get started. This video will go back to a series that I started a while back ago. This will focus on book analysis. Last time we looked at The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a wonderful book. Today, we're going to dive into another book. Now, before I name this book, I want to provide the historical stage in which this book is set on. The historical stage for this book is Texas. That's right. We've all heard of it. We all know it, especially recently. Texas, along with Florida, has taken a leading role to go against tyranny and all these Marxist overlords that are trying to divide our country. But back onto this point, we know Texas. We know the state. We know the size of it. We know the culture. We even know the memes. And yes, there is a lot of great Texas memes out there. Here's one. Here's another good one. Even people from other countries know of Texas. If you ask a German citizen who made this map where Kansas is, they clearly don't know. But if they ask you where Texas is, they'll know, as you can see here. This map was made by someone living in England. And as you can tell, their map's pretty interesting. But they definitely know where Texas is at. So what is it about Texas? What about this state has created this ongoing maverick renegade image that pretty much everyone knows about, even other people from other countries? Why does everyone know where Texas sits? What has caused Texas to be this maverick state that does its own thing, that does not care what anyone else thinks? What has been the source of the modern day Texas culture, this culture of mavericks, of renegades, of people who forge their own path, who do what they want, and who does not care about what anyone else says? While other people may look at this question from a demographic point of view or a sociological point of view, I, of course, look at this from a historical point of view. What has caused Texas to become the state it is today? The answer? The Comanche. Without question, it was the Comanche that ultimately dictated the evolution of Texas history. It was the Comanche that forestalled American westward expansion in this region. It was the Comanche that determined the boundaries of modern-day Texas. One piece of evidence that supports that argument comes in the form of a modern-day map of Texas. As you can tell, there are some major cities in Texas. Dallas-Fort Worth forms the Metroplex, is how we call it. You have Austin, the capital of our state. San Antonio and Houston are two other massive metropolitan cities. But if you look closely, you can tell they form a line, a barrier, if you will. Aside from El Paso, way over here, there's nothing here. Yeah, you have cities and towns, but they're nowhere near the size of these metropolitan areas here. So why is that? Why is there nothing in this region? The answer? The Comanche. Even today, these cities represent early forts that were settled to defend against the Comanche Empire. And yes, the Comanche did have an empire. So as you can tell, the focus for this video isn't just Texas history. It's the Comanche, and how it was the Comanche that determined the fate of Texas from the very beginning to modern day. Like we talked about before, this book was not published by a university. It was published for the mass audience, for everyone to be able to access and read. Pretty much any reputable bookstore is going to have this book. This book does an amazing job at telling three major stories. The first story, being the larger one, showcases Texas history from the time when multiple native tribes controlled the region to the moment where Texas became annexed by the United States. The second part of the story focuses on Comanche agency and how this tribe single-handedly forestalled imperial expansion westward, whether that be by the Spaniards, the Texans, or the Americans. The third story, and the smallest, focuses on Cynthia Ann Parker, a little girl who was kidnapped by the Comanches, who was assimilated into their tribe, and eventually gave birth to the last great Comanche war chief, Quanah Parker, when you see his picture here on the front cover. With all those stories put together, the best way I can explain this book is that Empire of the Summer Moon effectively showcases how Texas was not formed through pastoral means. It was not created in this peaceful, beautiful, kumbaya land. No, no, no. Texas was forged in bloodshed. Before the Spanish came, multiple tribes, including the Comanche, fought each other for control of the region. Once the Spaniards did arrive, set up shop, start building missions all along Texas, their frontier, they started fighting against the Comanches. Once Mexico gained its independence from Spain, guess what? They fought against the Comanches. Over time, the white Anglo settlers would move from the east to the west. Texas was that last unexplored frontier. And so these white Anglo settlers did not move into a peaceful world. They moved into a world that was filled with day-to-day warfare. And so they ended up fighting against the Comanches. Fast forward a little bit. US-Mexican War, then well into the Civil War. After the Civil War, you then have America fighting against the Comanches. The point being, from the mid-1600s to 1900, Texas was the site of constant warfare, day-to-day violence and bloodshed at the hands of the Spaniards, Mexicans, Texans, Americans, and Comanche. All that is beautifully displayed in S.C. Gwynn's Empire of the Summer Moon. The following sections of this book do an excellent job at showcasing the overall point of the book. Here, S.C. Gwynn explains that the Comanche were not just some random small tribe. Instead, they were a dominating force close to that of an empire. The Comanche were a military and trade empire that covered 240,000 square miles, essentially the southern Great Plains. Their land encompassed large chunks of present-day Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma. If you counted the full reach of Comanche raiding parties, which ranged deep into Mexico and as far north as Nebraska, their territory was far bigger than what we originally thought. Now, he does mention that they were not considered an empire in the traditional sense. This is what you would see in European countries. However, they did rule their land. They held sway over some 20 different tribes who had been either conquered, driven off, or reduced to vassal status. In North America, their only peers in terms of sheer area controlled were the Western Sioux. This is the main takeaway here. Such imperial dominance was no accident of geography. It was a product of more than 150 years of deliberate, sustained combat against a series of enemies over a singular piece of land that contained the country's largest buffalo herds. That land was predominantly Texas. And he mentions the buffalo. See, the Comanche were very unique in the sense that they never stayed in one spot. They were not an agricultural-based tribe. They were not like the Iroquois, the Mohawk, the Huron. The Comanche were Plains Indians. They were the ones who lived in a very nomadic lifestyle where they never stayed in one spot. They moved according to where the buffalo went. The Comanche are a fascinating tribe because they literally depended on the buffalo to survive. Everything they used, from weapons, food, clothing, tools, everything came from the buffalo. And so, wherever the buffalo migrated to, the Comanche followed. But it wasn't until the Spanish came and introduced the horse that the Comanche found their true source of power. See, before the Spanish came, the Comanche weren't that powerful. In fact, they were being conquered by other tribes. But once they learned to master the horse, they became the lords of the plains. No other tribe even came close to the equestrian mastery of the Comanche. Here, S.E. Gwynn talks about that. The Comanches adapted to the horse earlier and more completely than any other plains tribe. They are considered, without much debate, the prototype horse tribe in North America. No one could outride them or outshoot them from the back of a horse. Now, there were other tribes that did utilize the horse, such as the Kiowa, the Apache, the Sioux, the Arapaho. But out of all of those tribes, none of them matched the sheer dominance of the Comanche. The next big component of this book focuses on the Texas Rangers, how they were created, why they were created, and how their image still stands today. Now, for this video, I'm not going to spend that much time focusing on the Rangers because that's a whole nother video for a whole nother time. In fact, I've done a lot of research on that topic as well. This video focuses more on the Comanche element to Texas history. Now, as you can see here, this guy is Quanah Parker. He was the son of Cynthia and Parker. As I mentioned before, this was the smaller story in this narrative. If there was one critique I have for this book, it would be the fact that it focuses more on the Comanches, Texas, and the Rangers as a whole, and less on the story of Cynthia Ann Parker and her son, Quanah Parker. However, even though there's just a little bit, the story is still fascinating and still very interesting. Another great element of this book is how S.E. Gwynn effectively goes against the narrative. See, the typical narrative for U.S. history tells us that the white Anglo-Europeans came to this land and slaughtered and conquered the innocent natives. Now, to be fair, Native American tribes were definitely victims of Western expansion, absolutely. There were multiple cases of broken treaties and terrible things that we did to the native tribes. However, the story does not stop there. And that's why I like this book so much, is that S.E. Gwynn goes into that area that not many people want to talk about. S.E. Gwynn beautifully illustrates how the Comanches had agency over not just their own lives, but the land around them. The Comanches routinely dominated and conquered other tribes. There is a reason why tribes such as the Shawnee allied themselves with the Anglo-Europeans. It's because they hated the Comanches. Even the famed Apaches, guess what? They were conquered by the Comanches, and they hated the Comanches with a passion. So what does that tell us? Well, that tells us that the Comanches were not these pure innocent people. No, far from it. They were just as much conquerors as we were. And they controlled land just as powerfully as we controlled land. That point is argued very effectively throughout this book. In regards to pros and cons, I would say a big con to this book really would be the focus. On the front page, you see Quanah Parker. So you think this is going to focus on just him. Well, not really. It begins with the story of Cynthia Ann Parker. And it's not until chapter 13 that you start hearing the story of Quanah Parker right here. Well, that's page 205. So it's going to take a moment to get to his story. Is his story in here? Yes, but it's not the main focus of the book, as you might be led to believe by looking at the front cover. However, a big pro to this book is that S.E. Gwynn writes like a storyteller, not an academic. As I mentioned before in previous videos, academic books are not written for the mass audience, so they're typically harder to read. Books such as The Comanche Empire and War of a Thousand Deserts. Both of these are phenomenal books that also talk about the Comanches, but they're written for an academic audience. So they're not as easy to read. But Empire of the Summer Moon is written like a story. When you first start reading it, you're hooked because you feel like you're reading a novel. But here's the cool thing about this. It's not a novel. It's completely true. On top of this book, there are 2 YouTube videos I highly recommend y'all watch. This first one here comes from the channel Native American History. This is a short video, about just under 8 minutes long. This does a phenomenal job at providing a very broad overview on the Comanche. The next clip is from the Joe Rogan Experience. And this actually is a piece of a much larger podcast where he interviews the author, S.E. Gwynn. It's not that long, it's about an hour and a half, but it's a phenomenal interview. And you get a chance to learn more about S.E. Gwynn, his background, why he wrote the book, and you hear the perspective of Joe Rogan, again, a pretty big podcaster. Overall, if anyone is interested in learning more about Texas history, I highly recommend y'all start with this book. It's easy to read, you can get it almost anywhere, and the research is good. It's a good example of historical research put into a non-academic format. Once you're done with this book, if you wish to keep digging, then I recommend y'all dig into The Comanche Empire by Pekka Hemalainen, War of a Thousand Deserts by Brian DeLay, and Savage Frontier by Stephen Moore. I give y'all fair warning, Savage Frontier is a beast. It's a 4-volume book set. The great thing about Savage Frontier is that it gets very detailed and explains the entire history of Texas from Spanish discovery up until annexation into the Union, I believe. In closing, to answer the initial question, why are Texans the way they are? What is it about Texas that makes us so unique? My answer is that this state is very unique. This state has been controlled by multiple nations. However, it was the Comanche Empire that determined everything that happened in this state, from initial discovery by the Spanish to Texas annexation into the Union. Texas was controlled by the Comanche. The evidence of this can be seen by any modern day map. This area serves as a lasting footprint on the impact the Comanches made to this state. So when people come to Texas, the final frontier, and when people try to live a life in this wild, untamed, bloody frontier, a new type of mindset is going to be developed. A new mindset is going to be developed. A mindset of wild, rough individualism, fierce and determined defense of your freedoms and liberties, and this maverick persona that refuses to back down and refuses to surrender or quit under any circumstances. Texas was molded in bloodshed every single day. When you moved to Texas, you either fought for your survival or you died. That's it. There was no middle ground. There was no peaceful coexistence. And the main forces that created that bloodshed, that warfare, were the Comanche and everyone else. All the forces that try to conquer them, eventually succeeding at the turn of the century in 1900. So that's all I have, guys. Thank you so much for getting through this with me. I know this is kind of a different setting, different environment. I apologize for that. I'm still growing this channel. I'm still building it. But before we go, if y'all can, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. If you wish to donate to my channel, that'd be awesome too. And don't forget to support our awesome patriots who are fighting each and every day down below. Never surrender, never submit. This Constitution vet signing out.